This year's relegation battle might be one of the closest we have ever seen, with only 8 points separating bottom of the table with 13th place. So today I'm going to predict the unpredictable and give you the 3 teams that will be playing in the Championship next season. Stick around, because one of those clubs might be one of the biggest teams to ever be relegated. But first, let me introduce you to your relegation candidates. For Southampton, they're 2 managers down and Ruben Selles is the last man standing. The Saints are yet to score in both halves of a game this season and sit rock bottom in the Premier League. For Leicester, they arrive at the tail end of the season with very little bite. The difference between with and without Maddison is frightening, as goals and assists drop by 0.9 per game. I personally wouldn't recommend trying to keep a fox on a lead, but it certainly would have helped if Leicester didn't drop 22 points from winning positions this season. Nottingham Forest have placed huge amounts of faith in their manager this season, but after conceding the 3rd most goals in the league and scoring the 3rd least, perhaps the owners can't see the wood through the trees. A squad that is unrecognisable to the one that got them promoted might be the reason they find themselves right back where they started. For Everton, the Toffees find themselves in a sticky situation once again, as a relegation battle is on the cards for the 2nd season in a row. Perhaps the lacklustre start from Frank Lampard and the failure to recruit attacking talent to replace Richarlison may be the reason they slip out of the league for the first time in 72 years. An overhaul in attacking talent has not served well in Yorkshire. Leeds, ironically, have not been able to follow one, as conceding the 2nd most goals in the league is yet to be identified as the culprit of their problems. Bournemouth were written off at the start of the season after conceding 9 goals and sacking their manager, and yet they find themselves in 15th. With the most wins in the bottom 6, the cherry on top of this season would be to survive one of the most paper-thin relegation battles ever. Speaking of paper thin, the mood in the London Stadium feels as though it could turn at any moment, with West Ham fans believing Moyes has reached his peak with the club and is only beginning to hurt his reputation. Having to balance European football and Premier League relegation is a strange 2-sided coin, and they might only be one hammering away from slipping into the bottom 3 at the worst possible time. Wolves have hired former Real Madrid coach Julian Lopetegui, and surprise, surprise, their squad is beginning to show a little bit of talent. With impressive victories versus Chelsea and Liverpool throughout the season, they are far from being the worst team in the league, but they are yet to leave the pack behind and will be desperate not to be dragged into a dogfight that they might not win. As for Crystal Palace, they're only 2 points ahead of Wolves, but they seem to be playing much better football under Roy Hodgson. So despite their manager being older than the hula hoop, not the crisp, the actual fucking hula hoop, we're going to cross the Eagles off from being relegation candidates, leaving us with 8 clubs. So let's look at the run-ins to see who has the toughest 8 games left. For Leeds, West Ham and Wolves, they all have the most games versus the top 6 with 3 games each. For Leicester and Bournemouth, they play the most games versus the 8 relegation candidates with 4 each. So for those 2 clubs, they have some huge 6-pointers coming up very soon. Now, only 2 of the 8 clubs have stuck by their manager this season, with Forest having a 0.9 points per game record under Cooper and West Ham a 1.03 points per game record under Moyes. I want you to remember those numbers because they'll be important for my prediction later, but as you do that, I want to look at how effective really is a manager bounce in a relegation battle, and I'll try and give you these numbers in under a minute. Wolves sacked Bruno Lage for Julian Lopetegui and jumped from 0.75 to 1.4 points per game, a huge increase. Bournemouth sacked Scott Parker for Gary O'Neill and increased their points per game record by 0.29. Leeds sacked Marsch for Garcia and jumped up their PPG by 0.53. Everton sacked Chelsea's current manager, I'll say that again, Everton sacked Chelsea's current manager and replaced him with Sean Dyche and jumped up their points per game record from 1 to 1.2. Southampton sacked Hasenhüttl for Jones for Selles and went from 0.86 to 0.38 to 1 point per game. So, from all of these numbers, what can we tell? Well, the first thing is that Nathan Jones is a god-awful manager. But even with a huge jump in performance, Southampton still have, statistically, the third worst performing manager in the league. The two best appointments in the bottom 8 have been Lopetegui and Garcia, who have drastically improved their team's record since they've arrived. So, where are Leicester in all of this? Well, as I speak, they currently don't have a manager, which isn't great and definitely will affect my predictions. They're coming up very shortly, so we're going to have to use Brendan Rodgers' numbers, and they're not pretty. 22 points dropped from winning positions, the fourth worst defence in the league, and statistically, the second worst manager this season, including the ones that have been sacked. Worse than Lampard, worse than Hasenhüttl, worse than this guy. Do you even know his name? I don't. So, finally, before I make the hardest prediction I've had to do this season, we need to really quickly look at the form of the 8 clubs. Over the past 6 games, West Ham and Bournemouth are 7th and 9th most informed teams in the league. And Southampton are 17th in the form table, just missing out on the relegation zone. We might be in for one of the greatest escapes ever. And now it's time for my predictions. This wasn't easy, but let's start. In 13th, Wolves. I think Julian Lopetegui will keep them there. In 14th, Bournemouth. I think they'll jump up a couple of places and finish in an impressive 14th. In 15th, West Ham. And in 16th, Everton, leaving us with 4 clubs and 3 relegation spots. But I'm going to do this backwards, starting with 20th. In 20th place, finishing bottom of the table, is Nottingham Forest. I think they're the worst team in the league. In 19th place, it's Leicester City. So we have former European champions, Nottingham Forest, going down. Former Premier League champions, Leicester, going down, leaving us with 2 clubs, Leeds and Southampton. Will the Saints make the greatest escape we've ever seen in the Premier League? Or will Leeds survive? In 18th place, the third team to be relegated is Southampton. I think it's a bit of a myth that they're the worst team in the league. I don't think they are. I think Leicester and Nottingham Forest are worse than them, but they won't have enough to quite make the great escape. And Leeds survive, Everton survive, West Ham, Bournemouth and Wolves comfortably survive. Maybe not so comfortably, and they're my predictions.